So, yeah, thanks again for taking part in those sort of discussions in the first half. The seminar today was, or still is, sort of based around a presentation from Matteo Lucchetti, who's representing the Visible project today, which I'm sure he'll explain a little bit about, but hopefully you got some links in background info of it as a project that I guess is kind of broadening out the discussion about socially engaged practice, which I guess we're talking about quite a lot within this research project and the collective sort of investigation that we're all under. So I think, yeah, Matteo's very generously sort of come to sort of talk about that project, and maybe also with a case study on Jasmine's blank noise project as well, which will sort of come through that. So I'll very quickly hand over to Matteo, and hopefully you'll be able to sort of share your screen and go through it from there.
Thank you, Andy, and sorry for rescheduling things today, but things can change quickly, as we all know, especially in these times. So I'm glad that we could rearrange it in a way that you still get to witness a bit the presentation around Visible, so you get to know more about it, and then of course you will also catch up with Jasmine later on, which we're very happy about. I'm also speaking on behalf of Judith Wilander, that is my colleague with whom I curate Visible for 10 years. And I think, you being part of this beautiful program by Andy for Unidee, Città dell'Arte, with all an amazing group of mentors and tutors and professors. I think it's important for you to get to know a bit more about Visible. That is a project by Città dell'Arte, Fondazione Pistoletto, that is a bit at the core of the, let's say, the research of what Città dell'Arte is bringing forward. So I think if other components of Città dell'Arte are more like working on site, developing like long-term projects with the city in an international way, Visible is rather, let's say, a kind of satellite, I would say, that keeps the research going. So maybe it's important for you to know what Visible is. So I'm gonna share my screen so we can also look a little bit at the presentation. I'm gonna go faster when it's about the website, because I think some of you might have already browsed it a little bit, but I'll try to focus more on some key concepts that the Visible is about for Michelangelo and for the foundation, of course. So let me share my screen. Okay. I'm gonna put it full screen. Voila. Can you all see this? Great. So these are the two places, and one is the one where some of you usually go and many of you cannot go to, and is the Città dell'Arte, and the other is Fondazione Zegna, because of course, as you probably already know, this is a project that is made possible thanks to a collaboration with Zegna. Zegna is a company from the same area where the Pistoletto Foundation is, from Biella, and it's a family relationship that evolved through the years, to the point that 10 years ago there was a proposal from Città dell'Arte to Fondazione Zegna to invent something new, let's say, because that was the time when a lot of foundations, especially from the fashion world, they were really establishing their collections through public venues, buildings, Fondazione Prada, Fondazione Trussardi, and all of them. And we proposed to Zegna to, instead of building a collection of art objects, to collect processes, to think of collecting art as a continuous support to artistic processes, rather than to the purchase of an object that would end up in the, of course, art market system. They were open to that, and we started also because it was another kind of embodiment of what Michelangelo Manifesto of '94, Progetto Arte, was really about. That, of course, is the foundation of Città dell'Arte, but in some way it's also a way to go back to those concepts that were certainly born out of the 90s, out of his engagement in Vienna with students, but also they needed to be rethought within what we had witnessed in the first 10 years of the early 2000s. So what I'm talking here about is the fact that we were more and more aware that what was developed discursively about public art, about engaged art, was very much in a Western lineage of what is public space or what is art. So all those spaces that have been very much part of a canon in the Western world. So we wanted also to say, can we share a similar understanding of what Progetto Arte tries to do, which basically is saying to artists that you should really engage in a dialogue that goes beyond the art system and involve other disciplines. Can we read this same statement through the lenses of many other artworks? Artworks where, you know, there was no division between certain disciplines, artworks where art has always been embedded with society. So how could we rethink that? And that's why also we came with this idea of the visible, because visible, of course, Michelangelo was very clear about it. We have to shed a light in this area that is a gray area in between what is the art market, so the art that is supported by the art system, let's say, that has an economy that is very proficuous, that is very lucrative. And on the other hand, you have the institutions that are supporting projects in a larger way, also outside of the art system, but many times projects that were long-term, that lasted for, let's say, 10 years or more, that wanted to really have an impact on a community. They were completely outside these two poles. They were in an in-between that was a gray area, because sometimes they would be exhibited in an exhibition, not really being honest to the nature of the project. Some other times they were maybe lucky enough to sell some pieces out of it, but most of the times the artistic research that was going on in that process was not recognized. So Michelangelo said, we really have to shed a light on that gray area. And on the other hand, we also had very dear to us an idea of what we think the reality we operate within every day really is. So here the words of Rancière really helps us understanding what we mean by visible. Also because it reminds us with this beautiful sentence that artists are those whose strategies aim to change the frames, speeds and scales according to which we perceive the visible, and combine it with a specific invisible element and a specific meaning, which is a beautiful way to say that, of course, artistic practices are not the ones we're talking about here, are not those that already operate within a reality as we know it, within what is made visible for us, meaning like what, like the daily description of what certain problems are about, are looking like, but it's rather like the action, the continuous action of artists that are reframing our perspective, that makes us see things differently, that makes us imagine things otherwise. The first attempt was, we said the exhibition is not the format through which these practices can really be told, can really be made available to a wider public. So we decided to start the research through making a publication with Sternberg Press. And this started a little bit also the methodology. We recognized immediately that we couldn't do this from just our perspective, but we needed to be activators of a process where many other curators would tell us what it meant for them to work, to operate, to be interested, to engage with social engaged art. So we asked like 9 different curators to give us 9 different journeys into what social engaged art meant. And this book that you can download from our website, and when you are in Città dell'Arte, you can of course look at in its physical version, really has completely 9 different ideas of what social engaged art is. So we had like Gavin Kobo, at that time an emerging curator from South Africa, that told us about Google Active in the township of Cape Town. And on the other hand, we had Anna Colan talking from London, talking to us about Marisa Lewandowska and her project of imagining the Museum of the Future through a film that would engage a whole museum, Moderna Musette, in rethinking from the janitor to the director what the Museum of 2040 would look like. You know, so completely different ideas of what art could do to rethink our daily reality. From the book, we also that was a dialogue, let's say, with Fondazione Zegna, that suggested that a prize should be instituted. So as curators, Judith and I, we thought, okay, if we're gonna do a prize, that of course brings visibility, another currency that of course is involved in this kind of project. We want to make this into a way that it's really, we use the structure of the award as a research structure. What we meant was that from the early on, the idea of nominating is not just about nominating. For us early on, the idea of nominating meant for us to create a network with other curators every second year, to really have engaging conversations with them and to understand what they were thinking were the projects that needed support. So that created a network of curators that started to get to know each other as curators that were involved in this kind of practices. So this was the first step. And then from this curatorial advisory board, that if you can look through our website now, has almost 200 curators in 5 editions of the award. Then we basically collected over all this time more than 200 projects all over the world. So you basically, as it says, my sharing has been suspended. Can you still see the map now?
Matteo, we can just see the first slide. Let me just see if there's a...
Let me restart the sharing. Maybe there's something went wrong. Okay, sorry. Do you see a map now? Projects archive? Good. So, so we started to see that thanks to this collaboration with these curators, we mapped out a whole translocal scene of what socially engaged art meant at different latitudes. This map can actually be browsed through our website, so you can really see ongoing projects happening around the world that have been part of the selection process for the award. But okay, then of course this archive can be browsed through topics, and for us was not a way to organize knowledge according to let's say an encyclopedic idea of how knowledge should be organized, but rather to notice through this research which were the most discussed, the most interesting topics for artists to deal with. So if you realize there were many projects like trying to create alternative economies, or like try to develop projects around environmental issues, that meant for us there was an urgency we had to highlight, and we had to create a key, a way to access our archive through that specific perspective. Also, we started to realize how much all the projects were actually dealing with the effects of globalization in a certain way, because, you know, the project started, as I told you, like in 2010, so after the first 10 years of the 2000. And of course, this is really the time where the effects of the post-89 world started to show. So all the effects of neoliberal politics, so that capitalistic systems created the implementation of neoliberal politics in a capitalist society created the conditions for which artists had to take on their shoulders ideas of creating the alternative economies model. So like alternative pedagogies, because schools became more and more expensive or more exclusive, you know, so how artists were really like intercepting, like, you know, really becoming, intercepting the problems of the communities in which they were living and trying to use art in order to create responses to those problems. The award, as you know, every award needs to have a decision-making process, which usually takes place behind closed door, and then you have a big efflux or press release that says that this is the best artist you have to look at now. So we didn't want to completely fall into the logic of this, as we said, this currency of visibility, of like prestige that is just, you know, very ephemeral. But we thought, how can we turn this into a process? So we decided every edition to collaborate with a different art institution. You see them listed here for the first and last 5 editions of the award. Actually, the award is over now, so I'm gonna tell you later why. But what you see is like every time was activating a different scene, mostly in the Western world for a reason, economic ones, so that it was doable for us to make this happen in places we knew and in places that were reachable at a relatively affordable, but with a relatively affordable budget, so that we can spend as little as possible in the organization and dedicate as much as possible to the promotion and to the sustaining of the project. So, but the collaboration with the institutions for us became also a way to thinking by doing, to really like rethink the project every time. So we really, from let's say the second edition with the Van Abbe Museum, we had the Charles Esche as a chairman of the jury, and we decided to really open up the jury to a public process. So we started to develop what we called the temporary parliament. And we thought that the temporary parliament was really a way to share all the knowledge that was being collected thanks to the organization of the award. So from the curators to having like projects shortlisted and dedicating budget to them so they could create video statements, they could create text on their projects that didn't exist before. And we wanted to turn the moment of decision making into an assembly of people from different walks of life, from different perspectives, from the art world, but also from other fields of society, into a sort of neutral space, a space that was not the museum, or at least if it was a museum, was not intended to let's say welcome a public that would go and see art, but rather a more general public that would be, of course, interested in art, but also interested in all the different topics that these artistic projects were dealing with. The first, let's say, successful format that we did was in 2015 in Liverpool. And thanks to the collaboration with TED Liverpool, we managed to do the parliament for a full day in the City Council of Liverpool. That meant we had a lot of people that were coming from civic society, we had activists, we had politicians, we had people that were running projects in the city. So bringing really an alternative perspective over what art was doing, and not just from the expertise of an artistic gaze, but also the expertise of people dealing with the issues that these projects were dealing with. For us, it was very important to really rethink this Western modern of democracy, of representative democracy, and what it meant to repurpose that format in a way that could become useful. What we meant was, if we think these projects are actually making politics, are really like they are political in the way they rethink the structure through which our reality is organized, our daily life is organized, then we want to reclaim the parliament, the assembly, the public assemblies that we already have in place, that sometimes they really feel so far from the reality and they feel like fulfilling more of a political elite, or fulfilling like interests that are not one of the interests of the many. But to rethink how these places can really become again a place where people can use for a day to discuss collectively through certain rules that most of the people recognize as rules they can let's say stand by, they can accept, and they can use to bring further a conversation with people they don't know. So for us, it was also like a reflection on what it meant to, in a specific time where, we were, as I told you, we started in 2010, and this award editions happen every second year in a different place with a different institution. But we were also looking at all the projects that were coming through the nomination process, and we observed there were a lot of projects, like for instance, you see here some examples, like the picture here in the middle is the Aboriginal Embassy by Richard Bell. So an artist was already using the format of in this case, an embassy, but an embassy with a small assembly inside that would constantly undermine the official role of a political body. So in fact, this tent started already in the 70s as an activist project, as a tent to be set up next to the Australian Parliament to reclaim a presence that was not acknowledged at that time by the Australian government. Or like this other image, like a bit hidden in the background, the project by Jonas Stahl, nominated in 2015, where the artist started the project called New World Summit, organizing different summits with organizations that most of the time they were precluded from taking part to the democratic life. So for instance, the very first edition, he organized it with organizations that are defined terrorists in the place where they exist. Of course, sometimes for good reasons. I don't want to make it simple, but many other times it's actually just a way to pull away from a democratic debate certain radical alternative voices. So, and he did this, the summit, in many different versions, but it's really an idea of how can we create alternative summits in the world where excluded voices can really have a place where to gather and where to take decisions together. Another project you see from a Colombian collective that was using the Aboriginal ways of meeting, of gathering, of communal decision to reactivate it with people coming from the cities in order to sensibilize them towards the Aboriginal issues and so on. So it was really also, you don't have to think about ASCO entering a parliament as a way, as a purely curatorial game, let's say, but rather also the idea of the curatorial work as a work that is observing constantly the work of artists and try to mediate this work into other arenas, into other venues. Like Boris Groys say, like the curator is a secularized artist sometimes, you know, like, so it's really also about taking certain forms and making them work outside of the sacred, space of the artistic creation, but rather to put them also into becoming operative in other places. This is very briefly the first edition. It was the idea of recalling an assembly, a little parliament, where the jury was already not only the ones, the experts sitting in front, but it was the whole room. And there were like experts that were facilitating the debate, but the whole room decided. And you can see Ahmed Ogut, that received the award for the Silent University project, watching the whole thing happening on live stream and then shaking hands with the chairman virtually, of course, through his screen at the time in Helsinki. This is the one I mentioned in Liverpool. You see the voting process. This is I'm going to be quite fast because I know I want to keep a lot of space for us to discuss, so I'll try to be done by 4. But this is an edition that was very interesting because it took place at the Queen's Museum in New York, and we decided to go back after having done Liverpool, to go back to a museum, just because this museum was actually a parliament, was the Parliament of the United Nations. While they were building the Oscar Niemeyer building on the Hudson River, they used the so-called New York Pavilion, that was the pavilion made for the World Expo, and they used it as a parliament. Just to give you an idea, this is the place where the State of Israel was voted in 46, 7. I might say something wrong, if anybody knows, correct me, but they voted for the creation of the State of Israel in this very building. So we collaborated with a group of designers, the decorators from London, and they, now you don't see, this should be an animated GIF, but imagine like all those furniture that you see animating and moving around. And their idea was like every museum has enough furniture, enough things that can allow the museum to turn into a parliament whenever they want. It's just about the political agency of the museum that needs to be activated. So that in this case, it's interesting because we re-evoked the spirit of the parliament that was in that building through an artistic intervention. And you can see here how we set it up in such a way. The last edition of the award took place in Paris. Is maybe the most grand and majestic. I mean, we knew it was the last edition, so we had to play our cards right. And it was a very interesting collaboration with Lafayette Anticipation, a foundation in Paris. And it's important to say also that we always thought of it as a biennial thing also because it takes time to organize things outside of the art world that are not just spectacular, and then they don't have a real connection with reality. So it takes 2 years to really like convince people that what we're doing is of interest for the parliament, to enter such room. We had the vice mayor of Paris introducing the day. Every project was presented on national French television in the month before the parliament. We had full attendance the full day. We collaborated with 6 masters across Europe so that we wanted to make sure that there were students being part of this, because we also thought it was very important to show other ways of creating a curatorial project with socially engaged art. So we really took care in order to make sure that this day was really not just an art event, but was actually an event that starting from art would engage so many other people, so many other constituencies of society. The winner of this edition is Jasmine Pateja, that you will be lucky enough to speak with later on, and I'm sure Andy will be able to organize it. But it's important for us, I think, and maybe I'm going to show you the video of our project, just because so far we only spoke from an infrastructural way, a conceptual way, curatorial way, but also because I know you deal with social engaged projects all the time. But maybe it's nice at this point to introduce briefly Jasmine project, and then I'm going to close with what we are busy with now at Visible. So I'm going to play Jasmine video now. Okay, so I'm gonna share again my screen with this. Voila. Just confirm to me that you hear the sound.
An idea has absolutely no significance or meaning unless somebody makes it their own. How can an idea be taken forward? And how can an idea be shared by everyone? Hi, my name is Jasmine Pateja, and I'm an artist facilitator based in Bangalore. I facilitate Blank Noise. We are a community of what we call action sheroes, heroes, theros, citizens, people who are taking agency to end sexual and gender-based violence. Blank Noise started in 2003 in a climate where street harassment didn't have a vocabulary. It was called eve teasing. The first project was bringing all the girl students into one room and sharing the word public space. And in less than 3 minutes, we had largely negative associations to look at. For over a decade, we worked specifically to draw attention to street harassment, all the way from recognizing it, spotlighting it, building testimonials for a public to understand that this is something that does affect us. One half is about building testimonials of sexual violence and finding ways to do so. The other half designs public interventions based on what we've heard and listened into from what women and survivors of violence have shared. I see it as an ongoing public conversation. I said I want to be able to sleep in a park. I remember while trying to sleep, waking up to sound and realizing it's just a leaf. And then again, waking up with deep fear and realizing it's just a dog. What if we proposed trust as a given rather than defensiveness as a given? That's when I just lay there imagining thousands of women sleeping in the open, sleeping in parks, and wondering what would happen if we did this. What would happen to women and their bodies, and what would happen to public environments and parks, and whether it's open fields, to witness women sleeping.
16 दिसंबर को बगीचों में जाएंगे, धूप सेकेंगे और अपने डर से छुटकारा पाएंगे।
इस इवेंट में हम सोएंगे और अपने अंदर के डर है और झिझक को दूर करेंगे। इससे मुझे लग रहा है जैसे आसमान में चिड़िया उड़ते हैं, खुले आसमान है, वैसा ही मुझे महसूस हो रहा था।
A lot of times people say, this was so simple, what stopped me from doing this all my life?
My far uncle was home and he was being inappropriate with me and he was being touchy with me. And of course, I went to my mom, what else would a child do? She yelled at me. Your stance, your behavior, all of that represents a person who wants attention from men.
I really don't know how to talk to my parents because I thought I would be blamed for it. I used to wear burqa at that time. I started wearing leggings so that he doesn't see my legs.
I never ask for it. Invites us to bring in that one garment women wore when they experienced violence. That garment is memory, is witness, and is voice to that experience of sexual assault. What we're working towards is 10,000 garment testimonials to stand in front of India Gate by 2023. We'd like to shift what has happened at the community level consciousness raising to larger public level consciousness raising. It holds value to co-create processes that build empathy. I feel safe when I'm being heard. I feel safe when I'm being believed. I feel safe when I don't have to justify and defend myself over and over again. And I, Action Shiro, am your safe space as you are mine. I never ask for it. So whether we're learning to be idle or whether we're sleeping in parks, it is coming from a place of imagining, desiring. One Action Shiro's participation is inviting another Action Shiro to join in. That's the shift we seek.
Great. So you had a sense of what Jasmine's project is, and also just to tell you that this is ongoing now for over 13 years. So just to let you know, so what it means sometimes to have a long-term project, it means also to have smaller projects happening. You heard like Meet to Sleep, I Never Ask for It. So also like it's important as such an exemplary project also how it is made of smaller projects, small bits and pieces that then make an overall engagement in an artistic sense. I'm so looking forward for you to meet with Jasmine. She's, as you could sense, I assume, like you can really feel how passionately she's working on such a project. But just to tell you, just to close what we did with Visible. I mean, I'm skipping a lot of stuff, but what we are trying to do now is going to shift from what we have been doing so far with the award to transform Visible into a fellowship platform. So to really like make sure that every second year when we do another edition of Visible, it's not about deciding who's going to win an award, but rather to announce up to 5-6 projects that we receive a fellowship, and to use the temporary parliament not anymore to come to a decision around who's going to get an award, but rather to let the artists use the parliament to make their projects grow, to take decisions that relate to their project that they don't want to take alone, that they want to share with other fellow artists, fellow activists, or people from civic society that have a lot to say about what they're doing in their artistic practice and can contribute to ignite new energies, new ideas, new perspectives. So we are busy doing this, and of course Visible has never been just the award, but we did a lot of other programs, exhibitions, performances, collaborations, books. We were teaching in Stockholm at the Konstfack. We made a whole edition of Curator Lab on asking ourselves what it means to be a socially engaged curator. And actually the 10 participants to the master became then the advocates for the 10 projects in Paris. So they became, as curators, people that had to defend an artistic project in the eyes of other people. It was really an act of care, of knowledge production, of empathy, of understanding, and also like I'm thinking the role of the curator really as the one that that develops an agency that can let's say not only protect but also like help the artists and the project grow into unexpected directions. So this was really important for us also to take the time to reflect collectively what it means to be a curator of socially engaged art. This is something we assume we're doing, but sometimes it's also important, especially among colleagues, among even like younger colleagues of ours, to really stop and think and develop methodologies perhaps. So this is really in brief what we do at Visible. And I know that you had some links, maybe you have already had the time to look at them, or even just by hearing me speaking, you must maybe have some questions, doubts, and I'm really happy to try to reply to them, or maybe to find with you the answers.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Matteo. Like, a really beautiful presentation, and so much in there really for, you know, such a focused kind of presentation as well, like from the sort of, you know, very useful to have the context in terms of where that's come from Città dell'Arte, and kind of like, you know, very useful to sort of mention the relation to Pistoletto's practice as well, and then also the conceptual framework as well, and where it's going. I think it's yeah, so rich, like a lot to get our teeth into, I think. So yeah, thanks very much for that. Are you able to stop sharing your screen now? I'm just wondering.
Sure. I just wanted to show one last thing, just to say also this. The way we're building the fellowship is also through what we call so far the visible protocol or the visible paper. And it's the idea that together with Michelangelo, we are writing a new, not really a manifesto, but more like a paper that can help also museums and other institutions to develop autonomously ways of supporting socially engaged art through fellowships, but not only, also through the rethinking of collection. So to think, as I said in the beginning, we convinced Zegna to start to collect processes in the same way. How can we make available money that is there for collecting from museum institutions that have big collections, that can make that money available to actually purchase processes, so to support, what does it mean for a museum to support that? And we are currently writing the first draft that should be published in February, and then I can close my screen.
Okay.
Oh, no, all of you, that's great.
Thank you very much, Matteo. That's great. So, I mean, maybe whilst people are sort of gathering their thoughts, you can either put your questions through the chat if you like, or you can use the raise hand function or your actual hand and kind of let us know if you'd want to ask a question. But I mean, just before we kind of open it up a bit, Matteo, I think, as you're saying, you've kind of, you know, covered a lot of ground in that in a really generous way and clear way. There was just a couple of things that I kind of thought maybe you'd be interesting to just, you know, ask your personal sort of experience on them as well. So when the Visible kind of project started as a kind of, well, within the publication and the kind of archive and the website archive as well, how do the projects end up on there? Are they like self-selecting, or can people submit their own, or is it kind of through this curatorial network that you find those?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, we always had the curatorial advisory board element. So we always wanted to select curators that were already actively engaging with these practices in their context, either through institutions or through independent curating activities. So we really thought of them as antennas that could really intercept the right people that needed the support at the right time. But also we tried for 2 editions to have an open call. And to be honest with you, we are a very small team because it's only Judith and me, and sometimes we have collaborators more and more lately, and that's really helpful for us. But at that time, we were really alone. So the open call, I think we realized it was more of an advertisement because, of course, it gave a lot of popularity to Visible, because then, of course, open calls get shared through different networks and people get to know about you. But for us internally, it was really a lot of work, because if you take things seriously and you don't just look at the projects you already know the name of, but every name you take it seriously 100%, and you go through the application, you watch the links, you watch the portfolio. I think we spent like a full month, like a full-time job, just watching applications, which was interesting, but at the same time was really not, you know, it was not sustainable for us. So we went back to the curatorial advisory board only way of having projects. Yeah, we do also believe that, you know, more and more now these kind of practices are understood and worked with by many curators also in many different ways. So it's also interesting to see what we started, what I said at the beginning, also to see also different ways of looking at socially engaged art. So that is also very important, that it's not just, you know, a community based. It's for us, the requirements, maybe it's important to say, were also like projects that tried to implement transformative perspectives over the topic, the thing that they wanted to work with, and that they are long-term and ongoing. That these were the requirements. Then, of course, you know, the field is quite open from if you just give these requirements.
Interesting. Yeah. And I guess, like, I mean, another thing that you'll have seen during the course of this, and you as a curator outside of Visible, is that sort of embrace of socially engaged practice, as in the term socially engaged art, or art of social practice, in the last decade or something. Because I think, you know, in 2000 and whenever 8 or 7, you know, kind of around that time, like, very few people would have self-identified as a socially engaged art practitioner, whereas now it's kind of something that, you know, it's become a discipline in a way, I think. And I wonder how you sort of have managed that sort of shift in the professionalization of social practice, or something that used to be quite, as you say, ill-defined.
You're so right. Like, I remember the first lectures we were giving, every time the first question, maybe even the second and the third word was, but is it art? Like, you know, this is like, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen anymore, but I'm saying this is not anymore like put into question as much as it was before. So certainly we witness a normalization of these practices within the artistic system. So you see more and more museums that have opened up programs where these practices are actively engaging with the program. Also, sometimes in the best case scenarios, even rethinking the operational strategies of the museum through certain lenses. But the shift has been incredible. I mean, at the beginning, we were really struggling. I mean, starting from our founder, to make them understand what we were doing. Because, of course, for them at the beginning, I think they really thought it was more a philanthropic project. But then, you know, they realized that actually it was really an artistic experimentation and research that was really important to carry on. But I mean, I see my colleagues here, Alessandra, Gemma, with whom we share the parts of the Visible story, and they can tell as well, you know, how it has shifted immensely. I mean, now it's even trendy, and now the problem is rather the opposite. So, like, to really focus on the practices that really are still, you know, operating in a transformative way. They are very serious about what they're doing, the way they're doing, the ethics that they have at dealing with different topics and communities and constituencies. So let's say we went from being, you know, the ones that had to justify what we were doing to the ones that need to safeguard a little bit certain, like, important pillars of what these practices really mean.
Yeah, that sounds great. It really would be lovely to bring Alessandra and Gemma into it, actually, just because, you know, there will be a lovely handover from this to next week, which is their presentation as well. So we'll have time to sort of maybe look at some of the commonalities and the differences between the two archives, maybe. Maybe just, I don't know if Gemma or Alessandra have a particular comment, but just one thing I would like to ask you, Matteo, again, is, so in this kind of moment where you have the Parliament and you open up that discussion around, you know, what social practice is or what socially engaged art is to people outside of the art world, whether it's activists or your civic societies or whoever it is, I mean, that must take a lot of energy and a lot of time as well, because maybe you are getting asked those questions again about, well, why is it art? I mean, how much of the kind of time is taken to and just explain the context for those practices rather than looking at them?
Yeah, I think, I mean, just to give you an anecdote to start and to also laugh a bit together, but there the most recurring question was, can we split the prize in 10? That was, of course, and any edition we have made, that there's always been this. And I think it's natural because, you know, you just also don't want to feed into any idea of competition. That's also why we stopped the award. We also realized that was not bearable anymore. And we wanted also to signify, you know, a shift in that. So we also learned through things that have been said in the parliaments every time. But in terms of you know, luckily, because there was a barrier, let's say, if you would commit to be part of the parliament, it meant to be part of the parliament for the full day. Usually it would be from 10 to 6, 7 in the evening. So that was already a selection that if people were there, they also knew that they were valuing these practices. And every time there was like a doubt, but it was really interesting to see why was that. So it was really like very refined conversation that were taking place. Another thing that it's interesting to point out is that every time you really realize that every decision is extremely contextual, and this is something that of course you know already even when it's behind closed doors, but you know the interesting thing is that behind closed doors you can use arguments that you cannot use in public. And of course, you know, you can say, you know, but I know this guy is not serious, you know, something like this, to dismiss a candidate. If you want to dismiss a candidate in public, you really have to have a very strong argument, because people will know it's live stream. The artist can even respond live via anything that is available to him or her. So it was really interesting to observe how also this dynamic took place, but also the context, how contextual a decision was, also played interesting elements. Like for instance, just to make an example, and then I shut up. But like in Liverpool, the award went to the Carabin Film Collective. That is an amazing collective that produces videos about the condition of Aboriginal communities, but also like by extending the concept of what an Aboriginal community means today. And also speaking about pressing urgent issues like, you know, new mining sites opening up and displacing Aboriginal community, but doing all of this through this cinematic realism that really made them also win a lot of awards in cinema festivals and stuff like that. But what we realized was that being in the UK, there was what Ekaterina Diegot, one of the participants of the jury, a brilliant Russian curator, director of the Stylish Herbs Festival, she called a mise en abîme of guilt. So mise en abîme is a French expression when you put in a sort of lockdown a certain conceptual thinking. I mean, I explained it in a very rough way, but just to say that there was a guilt, a sense of guilt that was in the room. And at a certain point, it came out through this decision. Because of course, you know, the colonial past in Liverpool is something very present. If you think at all the, what went through the harbor of Liverpool, the slavery trade and so on, and the connection with Australia and with the Aboriginal community, even though it was never framed, it was never, you know, articulated in a clear way. But it was interesting to see that it was really something that has, at the end, played a part. So it was interesting to be in Liverpool and to think that the decision was not the best decision or the one that should have been done, but it was the best decision for the context. So that, you know, but in that moment, you also you take the responsibility of deciding to organize such a thing in such a place, because the zeitgeist, the specificity, the situatedness, to say it with Donna Haraway, speaks.
Yeah, fantastic, Matteo. And I think, yeah, that kind of, I mean, well, obviously, yeah, you've moved beyond the kind of the idea of the prize as the kind of, yeah, the pat on the back for doing a good job, and more kind of like how can we sort of support these practices in a, you know, to become what they could become, and that's almost like a provocative move as well, because it allows that artist to think about, as you say, the kind of context that they're working in, and the other possibilities for that work to develop in. So that's great. I just wondered if there was any kind of like questions or comments from the group at all, if anyone's kind of got anything that they wanted to chip in on.
You only had questions for Jasmine. I can try to answer those if you like.
Yeah, so kind of like, or anything about sort of jazz. Well, I mean, I would maybe put that in a slightly different way. I mean, I guess today, or like certainly like in the early session, we were just sort of talking about maybe concerns or kind of like challenges that we're kind of facing at the moment. And I wondered, you know, maybe if you wanted to join in on that a bit, Matteo, and talk from a personal point of view, just about kind of, have you got any kind of like particular kind of concerns or challenges that you think relate to your area as a curator of these type of practices, either about the practices themselves or yeah, what are you having to deal with at the moment because of the, you know, professionally, because of the sort of pandemic situation, do you see it sort of having long-term effects on socially engaged practice and what forms it can take? Is it something you've been thinking about?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I think, in certain ways, I think it has been much more problematic for other kind of artistic practices this pandemic. The practices that relied on, I would say, a capitalist understanding of, like an accelerated idea of like trends, distribution of trends of objects, and of course that had an extremely hard halt. They really needed to stop. For social engaged practices, I think what has been really, I think many artists that were not so involved in social engaged practices in these times, they also found themselves rethinking what they were doing and how they could also have a say in such a pivotal moment. So I think if we might observe in the next years more artists busy with social engaged art, because the immediate reaction was like, because most of these practices have to deal with lot of people, with community meetings and stuff like that. So everybody pointed out how these meetings were not possible, or how these projects would collapse. But actually, speaking for instance with an artist, I worked a lot with Marinella Senatore, which usually works with huge numbers of people. But because these connections are real connections, I mean, not all of them, but the majority of them, actually these relationships are still very much alive. And also in moments like this, people like keep checking on each other, and they came out with ideas on how to be together otherwise. So I think, when the foundation is so truthful, it's so honest, it's so important and needed and urgent, there is a resilience that always makes this project continue existing. The problem is when things are very ephemeral and they rely on a very brief, very superficial exchange of either money or validation, or the things that we know are the currencies of the majority of the art system that we witness about.
I mean, I think that's a very sort of empowering kind of answer to that question, actually, and sort of say, because I think the technicality difficulties that we're having at the moment as artists working in that field is kind of, can become quite consuming and paralyzing. But yeah, exactly that sort of fundamental thing, which is now more than ever, maybe people need the authentic connections and the kind of the different ways of looking at things that artists are able to bring to it is a really good thing to keep in mind, I think.
But to give you a concrete example, like Jasmine Patejo, she started this project during the pandemic called How Are You? And relying on the network that she has developed, she created this project where strangers could speak to each other and just to check on each other, just to have a genuine conversation during pandemic times, where you could actually be caring for somebody you don't know. And therefore, like what she called as care, like working on the practices of care. So how can I develop my empathy, develop my understanding of the others by engaging in a conversation with a stranger, being interested in getting to know how he or she is actually doing in this moment. I took personally part to it, and it was an incredible conversation for an hour with somebody I don't even remember the name of, but with whom I had the chance to really exchange deep things. And again, this would not be possible without a long-term creation of a network of people that respond to you and trust you. So this for me was an example, but there could be many others that I exchanged with other artists from our network, that they really saw their projects resist and rethink the ways in which people were getting together.
Nice. I think that's, again, very good to be able to, I mean, you must have such like a sort of encyclopedia of kind of, artists that you're working with and able to see it. So I think it'll be brilliant if you're able to sort of keep in touch with the way that this residency and the conversations developing as well, because I think it's, that's what I think, well, I'm feeling very lucky at the moment to be connected with so many different people that are doing different things at a time when your world is sort of closing down slightly and kind of feels like you so it's important to keep those things alive. thanks very much for joining us, Matteo. It's like a really fantastic presentation. I really appreciate doing it in the difficult circumstances as well.
Can I just use a last minute for self-promotion? Like, I'm sorry about that, but it's about Visible. It's not about me. So we are about to launch in December a project we've been working on this year that we're very happy about. And it's called, I mean, it's going to have another title, but for now we call it Annotated Bibliography. And it's a collaboration between us and the Public Art Agency in Sweden. So we basically commission 10 curators to select important books from that, for them, meant like an important contribution to the development of artistic practices through the use of theory, let's say. So how theory becomes embedded in artistic practices in a way that it really makes these artistic practices rethink the way they operate, the way they are reorganized. So in December, we're going to launch a physical book where we have 150 books by the Visible Network that are all going to be categorized and related to the projects. And then there's going to be a new section on our website. So you don't only browse through the projects, but you can also find these books that become really windows that open up to the complexity that these projects are dealing with, and through, of course, the contribution of theory, of researchers, of philosophers, or other expertise that are pivotal to the development of such projects. So really render more and more the complexity of what it means to develop a socially engaged project. So that was my self-promotion moment. Excuse me for that.
No, absolutely. It's good to kind of, well, also it's very useful for us to keep, sort of up to date with all that. So I'll just say, yeah, thanks again. Like it's a really fantastic contribution and a very well timed, actually, kind of like at this moment. So, for us to understand, particularly the kind of exhibition and the curatorial element to these practices, because I think we'll continue to develop that with Alessandra and Gemma next week, and kind of further on with Mick Wilson and Eva as well. We're kind of getting into that convergent sort of stage of the residency, so it's useful to sort of think about that. And cheers very much to everyone else for joining us. I don't need to do much of a kind of wrap up because we've basically did the kind of closing remarks at the start, which maybe we'll do again next week. But I'll send out the recordings from this session and any other information that you'll need for next week to continue. And likewise, we'll sort of make a opportunity to connect either with Matteo and Judith or Jasmine through the kind of one-to-one tutorials as well. So kind of keep on having a look at the links that got sent through for that. Thanks very much again to Clara for being the sort of technical wizard today. And I'll look forward to connecting with everyone else the rest of this week. So yeah, take care. Have a good rest of your weekend.
Thank you.
Grazie. Ciao.
Ciao.